listener, and welcome to Nocturnal Transmissions, the fortnightly podcast that brings you dark tales, both old and new, performed by your humble narrator, Kristin Holland. The author of this episode's ticking tale of tremulous trepidation tells us that this piece falls into the category of British Regency Ballroom Horror. Oh no, not that again. We can't wait. Nocturnal Transmissions is proud to present Jessica Peters, Minutes to Midnight. London, 1818. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The arm of the ornate grandfather clock on the balcony, dripping gilt, shifted to 11. Only 11, and already the crush in the ballroom was near unbearable. Musky heat radiating off the bodies of the hautants, animal creatures, despite their constant striving otherwise. Only 11, and already it seemed that this night would go on forever. One more dance, and one more song, and one more ball, and one more season, and on, and on, and on, and on. Rule Britannia. Lady Alice Linden was the only one who knew that was a poor assumption. This night was going to end. It was going to be the end. It was almost midnight, after all. Tick, tock. The edges of her mouth tilted upward in a wicked grin, with her eyes downcast and her head tilted downwards just so, an onlooker might find her demure, might speculate at how perfectly ladylike she was, at how unlikely for her to still be on the shelf at the ripe age of 27, about how absolutely improbable it was that she never took. Lady Alice knew better. She'd never let herself be taken. Not really, not fully. And tonight, at long last, she'd be the one doing the taking. She positioned herself against a wall, the perfect portrait of a wallflower, though she was anything but. Charming country dances played out in front of her, incongruously danced by the people as far from simple country folk as they could get. The wealthiest, the most powerful of society. While Lady Alice watched and waited, her own power welled up inside her. No political edge or backroom maneuvering this, but instead a black, inky presence throbbing under her skin. So vivid to her, more vivid than anything in this pallid ballroom. It was a wonder it wasn't visible. She could feel it when she inhaled, like breathing in the crispness of a fresh winter's snow, or the metallic tang of a newly minted coin. Metal, copper, blood. She could feel it when she tapped one finger against the side of her modest lavender gown, the power seeping to gather under her fingernails like water collecting in a tide pool. But not visible, no. Not to her, not to others. not yet. Lady Alice had always had power. She just hadn't always known it was there. She'd had to discover it. Once she'd read that book, done that ritual, she finally found out what she was underneath. She was something more than this room of the rich and the powerful could ever dream of. She smiled again, demure, ladylike. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The clock struck 11:15. Lady Alice was transported to the memory of the time she was almost taken. The darkened room of a ballroom like this one, the attractive young man, and Alice, of course, young, with her foolish brain still brimming with some measure of hope and no awareness of her power. Instead, that useless hope thrummed inside her. Hope that she could escape her household, escape her vicious father and her gormless follower brother. Hope in love? Perhaps not. But hope that at the very least perhaps she could trade her prison cell for a gilded cage. There were hands and mouths and promises, and it was all very nice. And they would head to Gretna Green in the morning, or even that very night, to elope. But then they were interrupted. He was embarrassed. She was ruined. When his hopes of her dowry dissolved into nothing, the attractive young man dissolved too. A puff of dust in the air, the sun sliding back behind the fog. Lady Alice shook her head and returned to the present, clenching her eyes shut for a long moment to blot out the memory of that night. She might have been ruined, but she hadn't been taken. The blackness in her blood throbbed in empathy. It was almost time. The ballroom of the Earl and Countess was as gilt as their grandfather clock, with an excess that ladies whispered about behind their fans. Gaudy, they might say, with a hiss like the vipers they were, while secretly they dreamed of snaring someone for themselves who was brave enough and moneyed enough to splash their own ostentatious wealth across the walls and over their bodies. While Lady Alice watched and waited, invisible servants carried ice sculptures out, precariously balancing the massive things. She winced when she saw them. She'd forgotten there would be innocence here. The crowd distracted her with their cheers, a collective gasp in awe. Ice sculptures in October! Can you believe it? The murmurs were everywhere. Lady Alice could believe it. The ice was just one more piece of the story. The now literally dripping excess of the Earl and Countess's ballroom. Their wealth built on the backs of the downtrodden others who just couldn't say no. Alice's demure smile turned into a sneer for a moment, before she was placated by the pulse of power inside her. Comforting, that. She turned to where her brother sat, chortling with gentleman friends. He met her gaze with surprise, bland eyes in a piggy face. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The clock struck 12:30, so close, and Lady Alice remembered the night that her brother thought he had the best of her. Stupid Thomas, as cruel as their father, with barely half her father's sharp intelligence. She was 16, on the verge of womanhood, before she'd even had her coming out. The neighbours were there, including the local vicar, a portly man with thinning white hair and a perpetually pinched, angry face, the opposite of jolly. My sister is very skilled at the pianoforte," Thomas had bragged to the vicar. Alice hid a smirk at the obvious lie, but if Thomas wanted to enhance the neighbours' opinions of them through falsehoods, that was his own business. She lost the thread of the conversation, turning to chat idly to the guests on either side of her. A shockingly normal night in her usually painful and isolated upbringing. If things had been like this more often, she might not have felt like a bird constantly beating its wings against a pane of glass. "Isn't that right, Alice?" her brother said. She smiled brightly at him, as if she'd been listening, as if she cared what he had to say. Then she nodded. He was yammering on and on, more lies about how she was skilled at conversation, at being a hostess. It wasn't until he said she was skilled at keeping house that it dawned on Alice. Thomas was trying to sell her off as a wife to the aging vicar. She nearly spat up her claret. The vicar was in his dotage, as parsimonious as he was sanctimonious, preaching hellfire and brimstone on anyone who disagreed. Most peculiar. Her brother wouldn't gain a thing from marrying her off to this man of the cloth. Not connections, not money. Not anything Alice could think of that would have worth to her foolish brother. Then she caught Thomas's sneaky little grin and realized what he would gain. Control over her happiness. Or, in this case, control over the lack thereof. Happiness had always been the one thing he could never win from her. Rage bubbled up inside Alice, a scorching heat that rolled over the edges of her consciousness like a kettle mid-boil. A wind whipped through the dining room, and every candle snuffed out at once. One of the women cried out, a high-pitched scream in the darkness. Then there was a rumble of amusement from the other guests, a friendly, murmuring chatter. "Oh, nothing but a freak breeze," a male voice said. This despite the fact that all of the windows were closed. People continued on with their merry dinner, chatting, laughing. It wasn't until the footmen managed to get all the candles lit again that they found the vicar face down on his plate. Dead. Later they said it was a heart condition, but Alice began to wonder, could her fury have done this? The thought passed until years later, when she found the book and found the power. Tick tock, tick tock. The grandfather clock on the ballroom balcony struck 12:15. Excitement bubbled through Lady Alice's heart and through her soul, an effervescence unfamiliar to her. When was the last time she had looked forward to anything? Her brother's eyes were still on her, so she stared him down and then slowly smiled. bigger and bigger, until it hit a massive, toothy grin. He twitched, and amusement filled her. Thomas was easy to spook, like a child, but one that controlled every aspect of her life through his grip on the estate's purse strings. She couldn't even eat without him letting her do so, and he would never let her forget that fact. Thomas narrowed his eyes. She could almost see the gears in his head turning, slowly, of course, wondering what she was up to. By the time he had figured it out, it would be too late. But he had given up anyway, turning back to his wine and his pseudo-gentlemanly conversation. If her father were alive, Alice would have never made it to the book and the ritual and the unleashing of her skills. He had always watched her like a hawk, and had the callousness of one too. Her father had been a perfectionist, but less so for himself. He expected perfection from everyone around him. If they didn't succeed, he'd grind them to dust under his boot to be rebuilt in his image. It worked for Thomas, still trying to impress father even now, long after he was dead. It hadn't worked for Alice. Instead, she'd become intimately familiar with the root cellar, where she was locked overnight every time she wasn't perfect, with nothing but a crust of bread and a torn old sheet. She wasn't perfect a lot of the time. Night after imperfect night, she huddled in the freezing cold in the raven-black cellar with her teeth chattering. Alice never slept down there. She stewed. Instead of breaking her spirit in the 13 years of her father's tyranny, it made her more stubborn, more immovable, more furious. She never broke. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The clock hands shifted. Lady Alice watched and waited, tilting her head to keep an eye on the clock, no longer caring about appearing demure, no longer caring about anything. 2 minutes to midnight. 2 minutes to the end. A waltz began. It would never finish. Suddenly, Alice's awareness expanded to the musicians themselves, the servants too, slaving over the elaborate fruit displays and the ice and the exotic meats. Blameless. Her resolve faltered, but only for the briefest of moments. Then she watched the rest of the room, with their guilt and wealth, practically waltzing on corpses. Her determination solidified. They would be innocent sacrifices to the cause. There was no other way. 1 more minute and any guilt would be washed away. The power thrumming inside her reached a near pinnacle, a fever pitch. Even her bones warmed. They would never feel that bitter cellar chill again. She smiled, wondering if the people nearest to her could feel the vibrations. The clock slid to midnight. Alice moaned in ecstasy as the power coursed through her, all of it, all at once. Her head sagged to her chest with the explosion of dark power, and when she lifted it, The people in the ballroom were marked by smudges of faint blues and greens. Their souls. No one had noticed the changes to Alice yet, but she could enjoy them on her own. She turned her head slowly to the mirror on the wall beside her. Her eyes were solid black. Her skin had paled to death white. She grinned, rose-red lips against alabaster skin. With a flick of power, she slammed every door and locked it, triggering a flurry of screams and gasps. Alice opened both of her palms at her side, and her feet lifted. She hovered across the dance floor, toes barely skimming the ground. As the dancers caught sight of her, they stumbled out of the way, screams echoing to the tall ceilings, trampling each other in their haste to get to the doors, now locked. Alice didn't worry over them. They would never get out. Alice! Her brother, the fool, thought he could appeal to her better nature. But any better nature had been beaten out of her years ago. In the cold and the denials and the lack of control over her own life. She made a lazy motion with one hand, flicking it upwards as if she was tired of his chatter. Not untrue. And Thomas fell to the ground, clutching his throat, gagging. She tilted her head back and laughed like she'd always wanted to laugh, huge and hearty and real. It echoed through the room, and the shrieks and cries of the crowd grew more intense, adding to the veritable symphony of sounds. A wind of her own making whipped round the room, tearing her hair out of its carefully dressed chignon to fan out in red flames around her. The crowd screamed, sobbed, cried, hammered at the glass doors. Alice shifted her hands in a delicate gesture, like she was doing needlepoint. But instead of threads, she gathered up the loose strands of faint blues and greens until she held them all in one hand. She marveled at that tiny tapestry of the souls of the upper crust of English society. It didn't seem like much at all. Then she yanked. In one motion, everyone dropped to the ground like marionettes cut from their strings. Dead. All dead. And so easily, too. Alice smiled once again, lost in the haze of her power and the destruction it had wrought. This was everything. She let the blackness grow and grow until it took over everything she was and everything she might have been. No more anger, no more guilt, no more pain, and soon no more Alice. Nothing but sweet justice. All the doors slammed open with a crash. The being that was once Lady Alice Linden drifted out of the building, unmoored, heading for one more dance, and one more song, and one more ball, and one more season, and on, and on, and on, and on, until it was all Snuffed. Out. Minutes to Midnight by Jessica Peter. Jessica Peter writes dark, haunted, and sometimes absurd short stories, novels, and poems. A social worker and health researcher, she lives in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Her writing can be found in Apparition Literary, Haven Speculative, the No Sleep podcast, and Cosmic Horror Monthly, among other places. You can find her on Twitter at JessicaPeter1 or at www.jessicapeter.net. We'll put these links on our website, nocturnaltransmissions.com.au. Just look in the featured authors section. Nocturnal Transmissions would like to thank soundsmith Walter Campbell, whose audio creations we incorporated into this story presentation. We used his tracks, It Follows You, and Moments Before It Catches You, as well as a little sprinkling of a drone in the dark, as key flavors in our audio soup, as it were. Walter Campbell is an audio artist who creates dark ambient soundscapes, electro-industrial pop, dungeon synth pop, imaginary horror soundtracks, and minimalist death industrial. Check out his latest album, Who Goes There, on the official Walter Campbell Bandcamp page, waltercampbell.bandcamp.com. This transmission was transmitted by Nocturnal Transmissions. Thanks in no small part to the generous assistance of our Patreon subscribers. A particular thank you goes out to our esteemed cohorts, whose noble ranks have been joined by Princess Praying Mantis, former acolyte, now cohort. Hello, Your Highness. Your support in the past and present is most appreciated. Let's see whose magnificent company you are keeping in our pantheon of true believers. You join Arnie Frank, Joanne Brooker, Wayne Prince, Johnny Kelly, J.B., Andy Shammy, Brett Allen, Boole Swivney, Rebecca Gates, Heathen Soul, Tippy Polo, Rachel Brown, Alex Brewis, Kel Wielden, Evan Dooley, Alicia Townsend, Sam Hankins, Amanda Moore, Wildy, Mudkip, Adam, Daniel Clanton, Thomas Funderburk, Robert Troy Hampton Peterson, Daniel Kamiankowski, Eugene Petrie, and, of course, yourself, Princess Praying Mantis. All right, gotta go. All non-public domain stories are featured with the permission of the authors. All voices and production are concocted by Kristin Holland, with a little help from the good Walter Campbell, it must be said, on this occasion. Until next time, as always, watch the skies, fear the dark, and don't trust anyone, especially yourself. Good night, gentle listener.